Welcome to this video. I'm Craig from the Sociology website. I am also one of the writers for Tutor2You and have been teaching sociology for 20 years. And what I'm looking to do with this video is to show students how they can check the reliability of a non-participant observation. We're going to observe a panel discussion, and this is about a number of different people who are discussing a central theme, and they will agree or disagree with the question that has been posed in this video. We're going to observe how they behave in this group discussion, and what we're going to do is record their clear and visible actions. We're not going to try and guess the motives behind their behaviour. We're going to make objective judgments on the type of behaviours that they display. The video is from Jubilee's discussion panel on socialists versus capitalists, and I've taken a small section of this video where you can find the full video on YouTube, and you can also find the full video link on my website, thesociologyguy.com. But I've taken a section of this video looking at the debate that economic inequality is the root of most problems. And this is really useful for students who are studying Cambridge OCR A-level sociology, because you look to research social inequalities on your specification. What you will see is 7 people discussing the question of whether economic inequality is the root of most problems. Some will be from a socialist viewpoint, some will be from a capitalist viewpoint. But what we want you to do is to look at their behaviours, observe those behaviours, and record them. And then there will be a discussion after the video. So the behaviours we want you to observe are whether people are taking turns, whether this is a very polite discussion, whether people are deliberately taking turns and waiting for other people to stop speaking. Is there any interruption in this video? Are people cutting others off to try and make their points? Who are the dominant figures in this discussion? We need to make an objective judgment over who seems to be putting forward most of the points in this discussion. Is there any disagreement or agreement between the panelists? And is there any alliance building? Does it look like some people are siding with others against individuals? We can also look at facial reactions, particularly to things that are said by individuals, and we also look at body language of the individuals to assess whether or not we think that they are agreeing. Now, this should be an objective judgment, so it can be quite difficult to actually categorise body language. We're also going to look at people who seem to be taking leadership or pushing forward their own agenda. And we'll also look at individuals who tend to be withdrawn from the discussion. So if you're creating a coding sheet for this, these may be some of the categories that you look for, and you might assign these to the different people who are taking part. Let's have a look at the video now, and then we'll come back for our discussion questions.
If you agree with the prompt, step forward.
I guess I can go. I think if you look at all the problems that cause social harm in society, you can regress like crime, you can regress domestic violence, you can regress pretty much any issue on inequality. And I think that there's a pretty clear link that that's the problem in and of itself. And we try to compensate for that in many ways through distribution, but I think it'd be hard to make a case that something else is worse than economic inequality, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's a knock-on effect. You know, you have economic inequality, it leads to people being unstable in them being able to feed and house themselves, you know, being able to support their families, being able to survive. We live in a society that requires you to have a certain amount of money to survive in a livable way. So, of course, the inequality in economic stability is going to be a central cause of societal ills.
Yeah, and I think too with like the different intersections like Black and brown communities, queer communities, disabled, like you mentioned, domestic violence, we already have a society set up a certain way and being such like a capitalist society that when all these other intersections come into play, it, like we've said, causes more, inequality within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the vast majority of crime or any other social ill, like monetary factors are what drive a lot of it. Even if you look at stuff like domestic violence, you could even break that down and say, hey, look, because we're having financial problems in our marriage or whatever the case may be, that can cause the issues. And so it's, if you have everything like better distributed, then I think that you would solve a lot of, not all crime, but the vast majority of it for sure.
And I'm a survivor of domestic violence, so I could definitely attest to like the financial abuse aspect of why some people can stay longer than like we'd want to, is because we can't get out from under, like, where are we gonna go, like to the street, you know, it's a worse situation or scenario than the one we know, unfortunately. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think one thing I can think of is housing insecurity, a major issue in my view of why there's such a problem with housing and with not just homelessness, but people having inadequate housing, is accumulation of capital ownership of real property, you know? So I feel like that inherent in unequal structure ends up having people, you know, not be able to afford housing. It brings the prices up, and they stay up no matter the circumstances. And that endless growth doesn't allow for people who are already in a difficult situation to find available housing. And, you know, we have millions and millions of empty homes and millions more people homeless. And I personally believe we could house every single person if we literally just give people housing.
Yeah, I agree. And then also too, even with, there's like the stereotype, because I've also experienced homelessness myself, like lived on Skid Row the whole nine. So I was still working like 2 jobs, and we are not making livable wages. A minimum wage is different than like a livable wage. That's different than like a reasonable wage depending on the industry you're in. I do a lot of freelance, so sometimes they can get murky. So I believe, to your point, what you were saying, like people are doing everything they can, and we keep like raising things up, but not raising up like how people are able to afford living. Then that's how we have like the homeless or unhoused epidemics that we're dealing with right now, and everything else.
Can the disagreeer step forward?
I would like to start because there was something personal that was said. So I grew up in a very domestically violent family. I mean, as a child, I actually was constantly anticipating having to attack my father to save my mother. It was not based upon economic inequality. So I think to reduce domestic violence down to that, it is simply not fair. There are inequalities that cause issues, but there's no way to get around that. So you're going to have inequalities even if everyone was monetarily equal, but of course I would say, where's that money going to come from? It's just going to make everyone equally miserable, and if that's the equality we're looking for, fine. But once you get past that, if everyone still had the same money, there's such a thing as pretty privilege. There's going to be someone who gets advantages because they're prettier, or there's going to be someone that gets advantages because they're smarter. So I agree that there are issues with economic equality. I think you'd have to be kind of daft not to think that. But I don't think the solution to it is to take from other people to give to other people, because then you're just going to start to create other problems. I think the problem is that we have within society a very small amount of sociopaths, and we make them our politicians that run our lives. I think that is more the bigger problem, because I know capitalists have the reputation of not caring about people. That's not me. And if we started to create a culture of wanting to care about people, I think that would start to solve a lot of the problems. But the thing is, we farmed out caring. And the fact is, when government becomes the father, we go, we're not going to help that person because the government program's going to help them. And there's something ennobling about giving charity, but also about taking charity, because you could be the recipient tomorrow. And that's the way like fraternal aid societies used to work in the early days of this country. So I think pinning everything just on the boogeyman of economic equality is not the answer, particularly with domestic violence.
If I can complement that as well, none of us, I assume, are millionaires or billionaires, so we are in fact living examples of income inequality, yet most of us don't commit crimes. In fact, the overwhelming majority of Americans are not millionaires or billionaires, yet the overwhelming majority of Americans do not commit crime. So to me, the root cause of so many of our societal problems is the revocation of human agency, whereby we are all responsible for our individual choices. And I think the greatest proof proof of this is probably Venezuela. Venezuela is a socialist country. 90% of all Venezuelans have the same socioeconomic status, i.e. they are all poor. So you would think, well, because they all have the same socioeconomic status and inequality is actually not an issue, yet nevertheless Venezuela is one of the most crime-ridden countries on the entire planet. So to me, it is true that income inequality can be a problem, but at the end of the day, even though we are not millionaires and billionaires, our quality of life compared to the 1950s to 1960s is so much greater. I mean, yes, it is true the wealthier have never been this wealthy, but it's also true that the middle class has never been this wealthy either. So long as all of our wages are not stagnant but are actually increasing, then I actually don't see why that's a problem.
I wanted to speak on the domestic violence one because I was just addressing an example within it because there's a lot that goes on in that. So I'm sorry that you experienced that, but I think financial abuse is a very big reason why some people do stay longer than they should because they don't have a way to leave. Like you have to go, you have to get your own place, you have to figure out jobs and all that, and depending on your situation, your abuser might have used financial abuse against you. And then I wanted to go to you because aren't we talking about in the US? So why are we comparing like a socialist society to a capitalist society in that example? And then wouldn't you agree that it would be better if we all made livable wages where we're at so that people could actually like live, not having to be check to check because we're making livable wages. So I just wanted to know why you went to Venezuela.
Sure, the reason I mentioned Venezuela is because the debate is socialism as a political philosophy or as an economic concept, and there's no greater damning indictment on socialism being applied on a society than Venezuela. But we could talk about the United States as well. So I agree, we should all have living wages, which is why the job I had 2 years ago is no longer the job I have because it wasn't paying me enough, and now I'm getting double as much. And that is because we live in a free market economy where I can choose where I want to work. And I think you're actually probably the best example of it. You said yourself that you were homeless, you were on Skid Row, yet now you are not. And that's a direct result of your skilled capital, your skilled labor, your talents, and your ability to not be subjugated to a system whereby all prices are guaranteed, all income levels are guaranteed. You made something of yourself. So if anything, I know you're on this side of the aisle, but really you're living proof that capitalism actually really works.
No, I worked like 5 jobs to get off of Skid Row, and I was there for years. And I should have never had to be there, but given my situation in domestic violence, like I got to a point where I was either going to die in my situation or make the choice to leave and be on the street. So no, I don't think that I'm an example in that way of successful capitalism because there should be government resources to help survivors in general, be able to do that. And that goes back to the fact that we have a lot of people at the top that have this privilege due to the capitalist society of like continuing to like accumulate money, and it's not being, I don't want to say filtered, but given to people who are working, who do live in the U.S. and who do deserve to be able to get out of situations, or even if you're disabled, like you need like some help, you know, for the time being because you need that disability insurance or something like that, like you should be able to have access to those things.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you're suggesting that those with an immense accumulation of wealth, the Elon Musks, the Bill Ackmans, they are maybe not direct, but perhaps indirect result of you living in poverty or being impoverished. But I would actually argue, take New York City, for example, the top 1% of earners pay 48% of all of the taxes. 48% of all of New York City's revenue come from just 1% of all the earners, whereby the bottom 50% pay only 5% of the taxes. So I guess I'm sort of unclear as to how those at the top of the socioeconomic status are somehow responsible for our lack of being in that top socioeconomic status. And if anything, there is nothing in a capitalist system, both legally, both on a policy perspective, that would actually prevent any of us from achieving that wealth alone. Now, I'm not saying it's simply just skill. Certainly billionaires will be the first to admit a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is grit, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time. But one of the reasons I'm a capitalist and not a socialist, even though I once was a socialist, is whereas socialism puts artificial restrictions and limitations on your ability to succeed financially, capitalism, there literally are no restrictions. So while it is true you worked 5 jobs, there are lots of jobs out there that will only be enough to having 1 job. I'm proof of that. I would say most of us in this room, most of us in this country are proof of that by the fact that most Americans only have 1 job and most Americans are not living in poverty.
I would completely disagree with what you're saying, that there are no restrictions in capitalism. I would question that deeply because the reality is the private sector has a vast control, and I mean the people at the top in the private sector have a vast control on what jobs exist and are available. Mergers, for example, are supposedly a opportunity for businesses to grow and become bigger, you would think that that would result in a greater increase of jobs. And yet with every single corporate merger that's gone on, they cut 50% of the workforce. Vast corporations, when they combine, when they cannibalize each other, rather than creating more jobs, they eliminate a vast number of jobs and create unemployed people. Right now I'm a teacher and I teach at a public school and I'm unionized. And this is the first time in my life, really, and I've been a teacher for many years. I've also been, for long periods, underemployed, making below the poverty line. And because I'm in a job that has a union, in part because I'm in a job that is government mandated, government created, I'm actually able to survive. But I'm lucky, and I'm one of the few who have that opportunity and are able to get that, in part because I had to get certified in these things. And that's another economic barrier for a lot of people. I had to pay money to do that, you know? So there are numerous barriers to every single person succeeding. I think the idea that there are no restrictions is fallacious.
So then let me rephrase. When I say there is no restriction, what I mean is you cannot identify a single policy or law on the books right now that will prevent you right now from starting your own company, from starting your own business, from taking a different job. You're only limited by yourself. You're only limited by your personal financial constraints. And that's true of any society. That's true of being a human being. We are only limited by our own skill and imagination. But there's nothing within a capitalist framework that will say, because you are a teacher, or because you are white, or because you are XYZ, therefore we are not allowing you to do this thing. It's difficult, for sure. Again, we are not millionaires and billionaires in this room, but in theory, there's nothing in this system that will prevent us from doing that thing.
I mean, the main thing is, okay, what causes the most social harm? What's the biggest problem for society? And if you look at the facts, like, we would agree that low-income communities have more crime than higher-income communities. And then if you look at the motivations for why people commit crime, why bad things happen, economic inequality is a part of it. You just said that your own personal financial constraints can preclude you from certain activities, and that's economic inequality. I think if you look at starting a business, the biggest barriers that people complain is overregulation, and overregulation increases transaction costs, it increases friction, and those things are economic inequality. And so I think if we break down what's actually causing most of the problems in society, I think it's hard to make a case that economic inequality is not the issue.
You're a capitalist. Congratulations. No more regulation.
I think the prompt is actually pretty fairly simple, which leaves us with not too much wiggle room to discuss, which is why I think we're getting pretty broad off the topic. So all we really have to, as the negation, the disagreeers, is prove that there's a root cause or any sort of cause that can come right before economic inequality. Based off the prompt.
That can supersede.
That can supersede it in any case, just in any instance. Would that be fair?
Would you agree with that?
I mean, based off the prompt, sure.
Yeah, based off the
So now that we've watched the video, what we might want to discuss is who dominated that discussion. Now, you may have differences of opinion as to who was the most dominant force in that discussion, and that is one of the issues that we're dealing with when we observe non-participant observations. That one observer may think that one person is more dominant, but another may think another is more dominant. Are there any conclusions that we can draw from the behaviour of the individuals who take part? Now, this may form part of your class discussion when you're looking at sort of like what we might draw from the behaviour of the different panellists who are involved. Was there anything interesting within the panel discussion that probably wasn't developed? Now, this could be an issue with editing in terms of sort of like the way in which the programme was edited. However, we may also look at how some people may be ignored when they were going to make a point, or we could look at some people who potentially may have wanted to develop something further but were interrupted by somebody else. And the final question we want to look at is, why might this observation have lacked validity? We may think about it being in a TV studio with cameras. Do we think that those panellists were displaying their natural behaviours? And why might some sociologists disagree with using this type of method to observe behaviours?